Okay, welcome everyone. We are pleased to have you with us today for this evening's presentation. My name is Dr. Amy Sarkowski, and I am the director of the Institute and the director of the clinic, both at the Children's Center for Communication, Beverly School for the Deaf, lovingly referred to as CCC BSD. Today's presentation is sponsored by the Institute in collaboration with the Parent-Infant Program, also at CCC BSD. This presentation is intended for parents, caregivers, family members, as well as professionals who are interested in supporting language, literacy, reading abilities of young children who are deaf or hard of hearing, or who may have other complex communication challenges. I will be introducing our speaker in just a moment, but I do want to let you know prior to that we also have other opportunities for you to continue learning and growing your skills available through the Institute. You can follow us at the Institute CCC BSD website, and there's information available there. In addition, we are posting on Facebook, and if you follow us, you'll be sure to get announcements about upcoming events, as well as things like tips for how to foster communication and other things that you might learn along the way as well. So we do invite you to reach out to us in that way. We are offering programming during the academic year. So we have today's presentation. We do have one more presentation coming up in June that will be in collaboration with the Parent-Infant Program as well. So please join us for that opportunity. During the summer, the programming is reduced because we, like you, are interested in having a break, but we certainly will be back with a full schedule of opportunities beginning in the fall. So with that, let me introduce you to Miss Maddie Ryn Gibson. Maddie's our presenter today. She is a teacher of the deaf, as well as a reading specialist, and an outstanding teacher who is helping to guide other folks in understanding how to foster reading and literacy. And we very much look forward to learning from her today. As a brief reminder, we do ask that you keep your cameras off during the presentation time, as well as keeping yourself muted. We will, however, have question and answer time at the end of the presentation. And at that point, if you would like to bring your camera on, you are more than welcome to either speak or sign your questions. Additionally, you can also add to the chat, and the moderators will ensure that those questions make it to our presenter. So with that, I will invite you to sit back, relax, enjoy the presentation, and learn from Maddie.
Hello, everyone. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Let me just make sure I have the interpreters up, just so I can make sure there we go. Okay. So thank you, Amy, for that introduction. So today we're going to be talking about foundations of language and literacy in young children. Oh, hold on. You'd think by now I'd be like good with Zoom and doing everything. Getting there one day. And like Amy said, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I would like to think I have a lot of strengths, but checking the chat while I'm on Zoom is not one of them. So if you put them in the chat, we can talk about them at the end of the presentation. If at all I pause for like a little bit of an extended period of time, I'm just letting the interpreters catch up to what I'm saying. Okay, so I, like Amy said, I'm a teacher of the deaf and a reading specialist. I currently teach kindergarten to third grade students, and I work on consult for the BSD and CCC programs at our school. So today, these are our overall goals. We're going to recognize that language deprivation issues are a very serious problem in deaf and hard of hearing populations, and we're going to talk about how to combat that. Recognize that deaf children need access to a language that's accessible. I thought about, okay, I have access in 2 times in this sentence, but that's the best way to put it. Access, you'll hear me say it 1,000 times, is the biggest thing we need. And then also I want to share information and resources to set your child up for language and literacy success. This presentation will be shared after this. So in it, you'll notice I've linked a ton of things. So it's once you get it, you can go into those links and kind of explore a lot of these topics and activities yourself. Okay, let's get rocking. Here is our agenda. I'll let you read that. So here's everything we're going to cover, but note we're gonna kind of just touch the surface of all these things. I could present for 10 hours and we could not cover all of these things as in depth as I would like to. So we're just gonna kind of hit the surface, but if you have more questions or follow-up, again, we have time to talk about it at the end. Okay, the foundations of this whole presentation of children, of language, of literacy are these things. We want to increase vocabulary knowledge. We want to increase background knowledge, increase language structures, increase literacy knowledge, and increase verbal reasoning. So like that's easy enough. So just go forth and do it. Just kidding, obviously, again on Zoom. I don't know how my jokes hit, but so I'll just laugh to myself. So these are things we need, we want to do, but I can read these over and over again, but then how do we do it? How do we access these things? How do we increase these skills within kids? We're going to touch on all of these. Things we don't want to do. Things like drilling flashcards, sitting your child down and we're going to just flashcards, they're going to memorize everything. We're not going to do that. We're not forcing developmentally inappropriate skills. We don't want kids to be sitting down and doing paper and pencil work all day, every day, or really even part of the day if they're at home. And for young children, this is not how they're going to learn. And then this one is spicy because it's so hard. We don't want to spend the whole day asking our kids who, what, where, when, why. Okay, childhood is not a test. Okay, so we want to refrain from asking these test-like questions over and over again. Is it to say you can't use these words at all? No, but we don't want all of our communication to be, I'm asking a question, I'm getting an answer. I'm asking a question, I'm getting an answer. I talked to one of my colleagues and she has a baby and I was showing her my presentation and she was like, yeah, like I work in the field and this is really hard. I know that I shouldn't do this, but I still do. It's something that has to be at the forefront of your mind. But childhood isn't a test. So language precedes literacy. If we want children to be literate, they have to be proficient in a language. Throughout this presentation, we're going to be talking about both things, language and then literacy, okay? But to get there, we're going to start with language. So I am going to talk about language deprivation, and I'm going to use that term often, but what is it? So language deprivation, it's a syndrome. It is a harm that results when kids don't get the language input they need to acquire a language. Okay, it's not in their brain, they're not born with it. It's all based on what kind of input they are getting. Language deprivation puts deaf children at risk for cognitive delays, mental health difficulties, a lower quality of life, higher levels of trauma, and limited health literacy. So in the age group I teach, I see this far too often. And as a teacher, this is something this can be prevented. Okay, this is 100% preventable. So one of my goals today is to help you in preventing this, because no one chooses this. No one is saying, I want my child to be language deprived. No one makes that choice. So knowing what it is and knowing, okay, this could happen, but how do I prevent it? That's what I'm hoping to give you today. Okay, so one of our goals is bilingual education. So we know first language proficiency is a powerful predictor of second language development. We're talking about deaf kids, that first language can be signed language, and then that second language could be spoken English or print English. Okay, if you have a deaf kid who's not talking at all, that second language is going to be written English. We know that early access to a visual language for deaf kids will support speech development, okay? Using sign language is not going to inhibit, prohibit, any kind of inhibit speech production. We know that. So within bilingual education, it's called code switching. So in my classroom, all day, I have kids that are signing, but also like to listen, kids who get information from signed languages and spoken English. So you can go back and forth. Bilingual education is not one or the other. Bilingual meaning two languages, we can be doing both. The goal of bilingual education in deaf ed is called additive bilingualism. So what that means is we want both ASL development and English development. They're both concurrently developing. What that doesn't mean is we are using ASL just to get the spoken language development to then phase out the ASL. That's not what we're talking about. Additive bilingualism is going to be, we want both maintained. So what can I do for ASL activities? So most deaf kids have hearing parents. It's about 90–95% of deaf children have hearing parents. So as a hearing parent, that English, opportunities and activities in English, that's going to come pretty naturally. Okay, but if this is your first rodeo with deaf kids, you're like, well, I don't know what to do. I don't want my kid to be language deprived. I want to give them both, but I don't know how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple ideas. These are not a be all end all. These are activities that I really like that can come up pretty naturally, that can come up just if you're sitting around a dinner table. Give me one second. Let me pin the other interpreter as well. Okay. So this is one of my favorite activities, and I do this every day, and preschool teachers do it. This is something that can start so young within ASL development. Also great for anybody learning ASL. So given a letter or number in ASL, can you and your child identify signs with that handshake? So, for example, X, sign that, and X. So you can take turns, you can model it, you can let your child do it. How many signs could you think of with that handshake? So I've listed a couple here. Friend, puzzled, suspicious, walking, person walking, facial expressions, battery. So those are just a couple examples. There's probably 1,000 more, but none of that has nothing to do with spoken English. That is an ASL focused activity. Another example with F, distracted, curious, interpret, fruit, find, perfect. Okay, so they all have the same handshake. This can be, I mean, it can come up if you're waiting for something, for waiting the doctor, you're just hanging. Okay, we can go back and forth. Let's see how many we can think of. This is such an incredible resource. I cannot stress that enough. It's called Handsland, and it's visual-based rhymes. So I'm going to show you this example. It's only about a minute long. This is what it looks like. There's no sound. So as you can see, it's visual-based rhymes, okay, that is being done from native deaf signers and educators, and they're getting that access, and you don't need sound to do rhymes, okay? You can see it, you see the rhyming, you see that rhythm. You can do this all in ASL. I've linked for me to share this out. Handsland is on Amazon. I think it has 2 seasons now, and there's a ton of different ones. Like this one's Let's Go for a Walk. There's some about seasons, plants growing, animals. There's a ton of different ones, and this one is about a minute long, but some of them, are up to 4 minutes long. But they're great. And this is just a good, kids can be in front of the TV and watching, like that happens. And it's maybe not always fully accessible. This is something we know is fully accessible. Whoop. So also with hearing kids who are watching TV, again, not fully accessible, signed stories are another great option for your child. I put this one on here. Rocky Mountain Deaf School has my favorite ASL stories. But the biggest thing you want to look for if you want to give your kid an opportunity to watch ASL stories, make sure they're coming from a credible place. You don't have some person who taught themselves ASL from, randomly on the internet that's trying to sign these stories and the signs don't make sense or they're not real. Okay, look up, there's schools for the deaf, things that come out of credible places with deaf signers. At the end of the presentation, I linked a huge list of ASL stories. She's my fave. I can show you really quick. This woman is a celebrity in my classroom. I don't even know what would happen if she came into my classroom. My kids love her. So it's cool. Fast forward a little bit. It's so interesting. It's good, awesome to watch. She's very clear in signing. She's so expressive. And, I've seen the highest I've taught so far is up to 10 years old, and they still are just so engaged with this woman. I can't speak highly enough of her. But this is a good option for wanting to give your kid watching stories that are fully accessible. Okay, another thing you can do is it's called sabotage, which sounds so dramatic. But what you're doing is creating situations that your child will have to solve a problem. And so, for example, and this can be very, very surface level, or it can be more in depth because we want to encourage critical thinking. Here, I'll give you an example first. So you could rearrange the schedule and see what happens. You can give options if they're not ready for that full negation. So tell your child your dinner is ready and say, do you need a fork or do we need a shovel? So we're kind of scaffolding it, the sabotage, a little bit. If it is pouring rain outside, say, all right, let's go to the park. We want them to be like, no, we can't go to the park. It's raining outside. What would happen? We'd get soaking wet. I use this all of the time. And if anybody's here that has worked with me, they know my kids probably think I'm the dumbest person alive because everything, I'm always doing it just constantly, and it can come up so naturally. And my newest thing, this is kind of hard. Why is a very hard question for kids, but I do it as telling jokes. I could be like, oh, I just painted this wall red. And then they'd be like, what? And I'd go, just kidding. I painted it white. So I'm kind of modeling it, but there I'm only waiting for that little bit of negation. And that can look like, what? No. It can look like just a facial expression. Okay, but you're setting them up to not just say yes to everything. Okay, we want, as a teacher, we want to give our kids all of the right things. We want to say, this is what is happening. We want to give them all the language. We want to tell them what's going on. But we don't want them to just accept, sure, yeah. We want them to critically think about things. We want them to say, no, that's not right. Okay, that is a huge language kind of step we can take with our kids. Let them critically think and give them opportunities to do that. We're covering, like I said, 8,000 things in this presentation. But again, when this is shared out, here's a couple of other activities that I've linked that you can go in and explore. The links are, very clear on how to do it. But again, I added conversations and just language exposure in both ASL and spoken English is a great way to go. So we just talked about bilingual education, some activities. One thing I see often is, okay, well, I don't know what to do. Let's use both at the same time. So simultaneous communication is signing and talking at the same time. So I'll give you an example of what that looks like. I am so thirsty. I really, really need a drink of water. Even in that example, my first language is in English. So if you're listening to this, that sounded like an English sentence, but my sign was a little shaky. Okay, so we're not going to do this. Your brain can only process one language at a time. So while it seems like let's give them everything all at once, their brains can't take in all of that information. So split the languages. I could say, I'm so thirsty, I need a drink of water, and then sign it. Okay, I have the interpreter. So split those, go back and forth. We want to know, or so we know why we want our students to be bilingual, and we have some ideas to support ASL, but why? Why should our students be bilingual? Why should we support ASL development? So I'm going to get into some research because I really want to convey, and I cited research, as you'll see. These are not my own opinions. I'm not Maddie from Beverly that just thinks this. This is what we know as a fact. So I said at the very beginning, language precedes literacy. Research shows ASL fluency is correlated with reading achievement. Okay, that goes back to fluency in a first language. With deaf kids, that is ASL fluency is a huge predictor of their later reading achievement. I'll let you go ahead and read this before I talk about it. So this is global language proficiency. This is basically saying, I don't want to say, okay, I want my kid to use spoken English. I want this. Really what you want your child to have language, period. Okay, at the end of the day, instead of saying, I want this one, I want them to use spoken English. I want them to speak French. I want them to speak Spanish. Okay, instead of saying, I'm picking one, for deaf kids, we want them to just have one. For many deaf kids, that one, that is most and best achieved through sign language. Your child's brain will be responsive to any language. One is not better than the other. Okay, spoken English isn't, oh, they can learn ASL, but spoken English is going to be better. In your brain, that's not true. Language is language. So for a first language, and that, if you look at any kind of research, that's commonly referred to as an L1, we don't just want for that first language relative improvement. Okay, we just want improvement. We don't want it relative to, oh, well, they're only using spoken English and it's like kind of getting better. No, that's not, like it says, it's not optimal, okay, for a first language. Prioritizing spoken language, saying this is the one I want, you're putting a lot of things at risk, okay? Cognitive development, academic achievement, social emotional health, and quality of life, okay? I included this because if you think of anything you want for a child, it can be summed up into these things. We want all of these things. We want cognitive development. We want academic achievement. We want social emotional health. We want them to be happy. We want them to have a good quality of life. Okay. No one is going to say, no, that's not what I want. I don't want to do that. Okay. This is what we want. But research shows for deaf kids, if we prioritize that spoken language, that spoken English, it's putting those things at risk. I'll let you go ahead and read that. So the priority for deaf and hard of hearing kids is giving them the input that is most accessible to them. End of story. This is heavy. I know it is. Okay. Is this choice going to best position my child to develop a strong foundation? Okay. We talked about the risks. Now, that foundation in one language, it could be spoken English, it could be sign language. Okay. But if you're not sure, and again, each kid's really different. I fully recognize that. Some kids are deaf kids use spoken English, some kids are using sign. But is the choice you as a parent are making setting them up for success and not risking all of these things we talked about? So I understand, I get it. We want our kids to talk. You think that, their worlds would be more accessible if they can talk and communicate through spoken language effectively. Okay. I'm not saying that's not going to happen. Okay. It definitely can happen. But we talked about, okay, what are the risks? And also, we know that if we give them exposure to an early visual language, they can map English or spoken language on top of it. The problem with just spoken English is, let's say we are trying to learn the word cup, okay? They don't have full access to that word. Sometimes if you're sitting very close and they're looking at your mouth and you say cup, okay? Maybe, but in context of you're just running around the house talking, oh, grab your cup, grab this. They're not making a lot of meaning from that, okay? But we have this sign, it's visual. Then they can make meaning from this always. They have access to this always. It's not dependent on the environment. It's not dependent if the speaker is, talking directly to them, if they're face to face, if you're looking at their mouth. It's not dependent. You can see it, okay? Then from there, map that spoken English word on top of that sign. Okay, we know this can work. So outcomes in spoken language have so many different factors that are going to contribute to their spoken language outcomes. Okay, hearing level, listening technologies, language competence. Now we have so many kids getting cochlear implants. And the thought in the medical model is, okay, they get cochlear implants, they're getting them really young, they're going to learn to hear, they are going to then learn to talk. Okay. Research is showing that out of these kids who get cochlear implants and are only exposed to spoken English, 60% of those children are at risk for language deprivation. That is very high. Okay. And not something that anyone wants to read. No one wants to bet a 60% chance that their child's life can be impacted by this thing. That's not a bet anybody's willing to take. Even if it was 5%, that's still dicey. But it's 60%. Okay. So if your child has cochlear implants, great. Can you talk to them? Can you develop spoken English? Sure. But you should also be signing to them. Okay. By doing that, by giving them access to sign language, you're taking that 60% risk off the table. So we talked about doing both. Sandwiching and chaining are such great strategies to go between ASL and spoken language. So that can look like, let's say I just talked about a cup. So I could sign cup, voice cup, sign it again, sandwiching those two things together. Okay, it's a sandwich of the two ASL signs with spoken English in the middle. Chaining, similar, but chaining could be signed cup, voice cup, and then maybe add finger spelling at the end. There's no what you start with doesn't have to be what you end with. Okay, kind of similar, but it's a way to go back and forth between languages that is not using simultaneous communication. It's not talking and signing at the same time. This is what you could be doing instead. I found this GIF and it was like the highlight of my week because I had this slide and not a GIF to go with it. And that really made my week. Do both. Do both things. You don't have to pick one. You can do both. Okay, we're going to get into a lot of literacy things now. Okay, so we've talked about bilingual education. We've talked about the risks. So now, how do you read to your child that's deaf? What are things you can do? So this is from the Shared Reading Project. It's 15 principles of reading to deaf children. I was going to put all 15 principles on one slide, and then it was just full of a bunch of text. So I split them up. Some of them we're going to go through pretty quick, and I'll expand upon them as needed. But if I do go through them too fast, maybe write a note down, and we can go back to it at the end. The first one. Translate stories using ASL and use lots of finger spelling. So finger spelling is going to be spelling out words using the ASL alphabet. So for example, the sign cup, finger spelling would be cup. Finger spelling, students' ability to recognize finger spelled words is also correlated with later reading achievement. So don't shy away from it. We'll talk a little bit more about finger spelling later, but don't be scared of it. Keep both languages visible. So if you're reading a book, they can see the book, they can see the print, they can see your hands. And if you are doing those sandwiching training strategies in English, make sure they can see your face. Elaborate on the text. When you're reading, you don't have to just stick to the word. Read stories on a storytelling to story reading continuum. So what you'll do is, given a book, the first time you read that book, you want them to understand what's going on. So you're really telling a story. You're giving them a ton of information to make sure they understand what is happening. And then the next few times they read, or you're reading that book, stick to the text. You're moving from storytelling to story reading. Follow the child's lead. If you're reading a book and there's the smallest picture of a chicken and they are all into talking about that chicken, go do it. Okay, follow their lead with what they're interested in, what they want to talk about, what they want to look at. Make what is implied explicit. Clarify things as you read through. You don't want to leave the unknown just hanging there. You really want to clarify things as you're reading a text. Adjust your sign placement to fit the story. So for example, if I'm reading a book and there's a picture of, let's say, a mom, I can put my face right next to that book and I'll sign Mom. You can also sign on your child as a good model. Okay, you can sign that, sign on them. Okay, you can sign on the book, sign on them, change, your variations of where you're signing to fit the story. Adjust your signing style to fit the story the same way you would read a book aloud just in English, how you're changing your tone. You want to do the same thing in ASL. If you have a character that's furious, you don't want to sign. No, they're mad, they're furious. You want to change that signing style to represent what's happening in the book. Use facial expressions, use your body language. Connect concepts to the real world. If you're reading a book about a library, talk about a time you guys went to the library. Make those connections. Use attention maintenance strategies. I know this is easier said than done. But you can tap them, you can say, come on, try, use strategies to keep them engaged in the text, or like, hey, look. I get it. I'm telling you right now, that's not going to work every time. I recognize that. Use eye gaze to elicit participation. So you're looking at the book. When they are using language, you are looking at them, and then you're looking back to the book. Engage in role play, act out a book. Prop up the book and act out a whole scene that happens. So a lot of books, which are obviously written in English, a lot of books for younger kids have very repetitive English phrases. So for example, a book about a farm, each page could be, I see a goat, I see a pig, I see a horse. ASL and English don't have a word-to-word correspondence. Okay, so a phrase in English could have like 10 different ways to say that in ASL. Use those 10 ways. Okay, change up your variations of ASL and how that is translated. This is self-explanatory. Keep it positive. I can't see any of you, but I'm really hoping my gifts are appreciated. I thought this was silly. And then expect your child to become literate. Keep high expectations. You believe they can do it. They want to meet those expectations. Okay. I know that was very fast, and that was 15 different things. You can go back and look at them, but we want to take those things and we're going to mush it with a shared reading approach. This is the best way to read, I think, to do read alouds, to engage with text. So this next we're going to get into, it's called a shared reading approach. So this approach is explained beautifully in this book, which I have pictured. It's Comprehensive Literacy for All. So shared reading is just defined as interactions between an adult and a student when they're reading a book together. The whole goal of this is we want kids to be saying something about the book. We want their engagement. We want interactions. And so this book sets the title, Teaching Students with Significant Disabilities to Read and Write. This shared reading approach, if you have hearing kids at home, we get into it, try this, okay? It works across the board. So this image comes from a book called No David. Instead of saying, who is this? What is happening? Where are they? And trust me, as a teacher, I fall back into this, okay? Because it's what we feel like we should be doing. We want to see if they're understanding what's happening. We want to see if they know who the characters are. We want to see if they're understanding what's going on, okay? Instead of that, let's try a different approach. Try, oh, I see you looking at David. He is messy. I wonder what's going to happen next. And you're going to expand on what they say. Your student, child, oh my goodness. Oh, sorry. Everybody just saw my desktop. That was embarrassing. It's not organized. That is a fault. So expand on student language. So if they say one word, bad. Oh, he is being bad. Look at him. We can't throw food. So wait for your child to contribute. That's a lot to process, especially if they're so used to who, what, where, when, why. Wait for their contribution. They need to process what you said and then think about their own comment. Okay, so give it some time, let them contribute. But this is shifting into open-ended questions and comments. So to do this, we want to label objects in the illustration, talk about what's going on in the book, refer to real life connections, things that happen, and also reference the print. So there's a way to remember this. It's called CAR. I'm going to show you a graphic in a minute, but you're going to comment and then wait with your open-ended comments. And then you'll ask for participation and then wait again. And then you'll respond by adding a little bit more. Okay, this changes the structure of how you're reading a book with a child. We want a dialogue. We want back and forth. Okay, even think about long-term goals for people. Okay, if one of my friends read a book, I'm going to say, oh, you read that book. I'm not going to say who, what, where, when, why. No, I'm going to say, oh, did you like it? Did you not like it? What are your favorite parts about it? What happened? It's more of a dialogue. Okay, so, and who, what, where, when, why can also become very rote, kind of boring-ish. And the structure of that is I'm asking a question and I'm expecting a specific answer. Okay, and that gets old pretty quick because it's almost like a power imbalance. I know, I'm waiting for you to tell me what I already know. We want a dialogue. We want to kind of equal this. I don't always want to know what they're going to tell me. Okay, their comprehension, you're going to be able to gauge by their comments and what they're saying about the book. And so it's funny, I do this in my classroom, and I've been doing it for a very long time, and my kids are very, very honest about what they have to say. It's now like, what's going to happen next? And they're like, I actually don't even like this book because I would never do that. I don't want to read this anymore. And I'm like, oh, okay, but that's fine. And then it can be, okay, I understand, and go from there. But that's a dialogue. And, it can turn into, we talked about expanding on the book. What would happen if we had a food fight? What if I throw this pie at you? I wonder what's going to happen next. When you're acting it out, a mess for the kitchen, but act this out. And then go back and read it. Okay, we want this dialogue. This is going to help with their critical thinking skills. This negation that we talked about before, we're going to see that. Okay, we want them to think critically about text and not just answer these rote questions. Here's a quick graphic. I included it just because I think it's pretty good to follow. So you'll start all the way on the left, read the page and comment, wait. If there's no student response, ask for participation. I'm gonna do this. Well, tell me what you see here. Tell me what's going on. Okay. Wait, if there's no student response, you can model a possible comment. Oh, David is so messy. If they do comment, ask a question, interact, go with that. You're following their lead here. Okay. Repeat what they said, add a little more to it, and keep on moving. Okay, so I'm going to go back one slide. This asks for participation. For them to participate in a text, they have to understand what's going on. They have to bring background knowledge to the book they are reading. So, taking a step back, how do we increase background knowledge? How do we get them to participate with a text? Go ahead and read this. So, in short, schema is just this web in your brain for how things are categorized. So word heavy quote, but basically, as we learn things, that information has to connect somewhere. Okay, we add to the schema in our brain. That's how we learn things. If you learn something and it can't attach anywhere in your brain, then you're probably not going to remember it. I could pull out right now a medical textbook. I could read it aloud. I can sound out the words. I can do my best. I don't have a lot of background knowledge coming into this text, so I'll read it. It'll sound good, but I'm not going to remember any of it because I have nothing to connect it to. Okay, here's an example. When you think of the word fruit, what image is in your head right now? I could bet it's probably something like this. Okay, but what about these? Okay, jackfruit or dragon fruit and jackfruit. Those probably aren't unless you're eating dragon fruit and jackfruit all the time, that's probably not the first thing that's going to come to your mind. Okay, so I see, and you'll see this in text too. This is going to come back to actually reading. But first with language, okay, maybe I have never tasted a jackfruit. Maybe I've never even seen one. Okay, but if I read or hear jackfruit, say, okay, it's a fruit. I have this schema already set up on fruits. I know they have seeds. They're healthy. They're sweet a lot of the times. So this is new information that I'm bringing some background to this unknown topic. This is like a very shoddy example of me trying to use an image to reflect what it would look like in your brain. So as our knowledge increases, our ability to create more complex schema, these webs, keeps growing. Okay, it's easier for us to remember new information because we can connect it to something we already have. So I have this schema of fruit, and I can add dragon fruit and jackfruit to that. Again, graphics, not my strong point. So we need to always connect new information to known information. This is how we read. Okay, as you get older, so there's a shift between kids learning how to read and reading to learn something. Okay, so once students have the foundational skills to read text, they're expected to read text and get information from it. To be able to do that, they have to bring background to the text. They have to have a way to figure out what's going on. Here is a caveat with deaf children. Deaf children, in most instances, are not coming to the table with the same background knowledge as hearing children. Okay, think about if you are walking with your child outside and it's a beautiful day and the child is hearing. You would just kind of chit chat. Oh my goodness, it is beautiful out. Look at the clouds. It is a clear day. Looks like we're going to get no rain. Okay, you're not planning to teach this, you're just chit chatting about it. Okay, but a deaf kid, are they getting that same language exposure? Okay, it's called incidental learning. With hearing kids, they maybe pick up information that they hear on the TV, even if they're not watching it. They're picking up on maybe their parents' conversation that they're not included in, but they're hearing what's happening. Okay, deaf children don't have that same access. Okay, so that incidental learning is so far reduced with deaf kids unless they're in a fully signing environment. Okay, so we need to create a language-rich environment for deaf kids. That incidental learning has to be more intentional now. Okay, we need to create a language-rich environment because while maybe in just that instance, we're talking about it's a nice day outside, we see the clouds, that's going into their schema, their background knowledge. Okay, it's a nice day out, the sky's blue, the clouds are really light, they're white, so it's probably not going to rain. Okay, they're storing all of these things, and your goal is on that walk not to be teaching about the clouds. It just comes up. Okay, but that's how we're building schema within our children. So this relates to reading because we want kids to comprehend what they're reading. Okay, that comprehension occurs when they are connecting that new information to known information to understand what is happening. This is what this can kind of look like. A very simple example. So in their mind, kids are developing, okay, I have this, it's called a superordinate category, okay, animal. And it can fall into these subordinate categories. Okay, so I know dogs are animals, I know bears are animals, I know cows are animals. Okay, so that's kind of how it's going to be set up at the very beginning. But then we want students to increase that schema. So then we'd hope as they develop, as their schema gets bigger, it looks something like this. With deaf kids, I love this graphic. We tend to think, okay, well, they're not going to get all the finger spelling. Let me just label, for example, bird. Okay, there's a ton of different kinds of birds. Okay, that label bird should be a superordinate category. And underneath it, woodpecker, sparrow, all these other types of birds. But if every time you see a bird, you're labeling bird, 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 that superordinate category is limited in how much it can drop down. In their mind, they're like, okay, well, I have a picture of like a lot, I can envision a lot of different kinds of birds, but I don't really have a name for them. This is where that sandwiching can come in. Okay, you can start with bird, and then you can finger spell robin. It's a bird. Okay, that sandwiching and chaining can be done just within ASL. You can chain that to bird, bird, robin. You can just keep on going, keep with that chain. But we don't want to overprotect them, and in doing so, simplify their language. Just think, would you do the same thing for a hearing child? For every bird you see, would you only ever label it a bird? Probably not. So here's just another just additional thoughts about increasing student schema. I put a picture here. It doesn't have to be, again, like you're using flashcards to be like, let's memorize every single bird that there is. It can be fun activities like this. Okay, we're sorting between undersea animals and farm animals. I've talked about this a bunch. Don't use tests like questions. Let these things come up in conversation. Don't make it, well, what kind of bird is this? If they don't hear something or don't understand something, take the time to figure out what they missed or what they don't understand. Don't just be like, never mind, forget about it. When you start introducing new things, use real images or realistic images. I know this picture has cartoons, but this was done after a unit to teach about different animals. But if you're introducing, let's say, an octopus, and they have no idea what an octopus is, where it lives, what it looks like, don't start with a cartoon picture. Show them a video or show them a picture of a real octopus. What else do our kids do? So many other things, but the last thing we're going to talk about is executive function. So go ahead and read that. So executive function is a huge umbrella that encompasses so many different skills. Basically, we need to filter distractions, prioritize tasks, set and achieve goals, control your impulses. So here's just a couple quick examples by age of what you can do with your kids. But if your kid, we're going to go through ages. If your kid's not there yet, don't harp on the age. Go back to where they're at developmentally. Okay, so 6 to 18 months, peekaboo, pat a cake, just conversations. Um, 18 to 36 months, imaginary play, simple puzzles, matching, sorting. Talking about feelings is great because that also is you're introducing another point of view. You may be happy, but your brother is crying. So let's talk about the differences in feelings. and narrating their play. Talk about what they're doing as they're doing it. Imaginary play, keep doing that for a long time. Have them tell you a story. And I didn't add it here, but also have them teach you something. Or if you do something together, I have cooking here. If you and your child make a recipe together, have them teach somebody else how to make that recipe. Yoga is another good one. And then as they get older, card games. So they're playing cards. They have to say, okay, this is what the other person did. Now I have to make a decision based on what that person did, even if it's not what I thought to begin with. They're really critically thinking and trying and making decisions. Along with this, also turn taking. I included it. These are just a ton of resources for you, just that you can explore later. The first one is the ASL stories list that I was talking about. I also love and want to highlight this Hands and Voices. It's a parent checklist. So when you're considering where to send your child to school and your child is deaf or hard of hearing, this is a good parent-friendly checklist for things to consider. And then I have two, if you're not sure of any ASL signs, these are good websites. I also attached the 15 principles of reading to deaf children, which is the 15 slides we talked about before. Those kind of go more in depth. And then VL2, this is research briefs. They're only, I think they're max like 5 pages. If you want to see current research in the field, these are really great and very accessible. This is also executive function resources, and I've linked all of these as well. The end.
Thank you, Maddie. I invite everyone to share a reaction. If you touch on the reactions button at the bottom, let's give Maddie a hand. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. We do invite people to ask questions, so feel free to put it into the chat if you would like. Or you can also turn on your camera. We can call on people and give you a chance to ask questions directly. I do see that in the chat, there is a question about the recording and the slides. Maddie has kindly agreed to share her slides. So for all people who registered for today, these will be sent out to you after about a week or so, perhaps a little bit longer because there is an extended long weekend in the middle, but we will be making a video of this, so capturing both Maddie's presentation as well as the sign language interpreters and the slides. So then that video will also be available.
I have the chat up.
Okay.
So Stacy asked what educational placement or programming is needed for a child to become bilingual. You can look for deaf children, it's called bilingual, bicultural models of education. I can add that also at the bottom. Again, my own opinion, if you have a deaf child, a red flag would be any program that says spoken English only or will teach child to lip read. Those are things I'd probably stay away from, but I would look up bilingual, bicultural, or even total communication. Total communication gets a bad rap because sometimes it's done as simultaneous communication, but in its true form, it can be giving both. So in that resources, I have a link to that parent checklist. That's a good way you can go through, and that will help you make that decision. It's where it's not overwhelming. You can really go through and see, and you can meet with your school district to help fill that out and help meet those needs. Oh, Stacy, you're speaking to my heart. So complex communicators. Stacy asks, how do you modify shared reading with complex communicators, or are they needed? Yes. So students, I thought about including students that use alternative communication, AAC, um, within this. It's just taking a ton of time, but yes. So I'll give you a quick example. If you are reading a book, let's say about, I'm obviously on the spot, farm animals crossing the street, and there's a stop sign. So complex communicators, if they're using a device, think of what you want to model, what you want to get out of this shared reading. And if you want them to recognize how can they best participate, the stop sign. So maybe every time they're like, no, stop, put a graphic of that symbol that's on their AAC, and you're modeling touching it. Stop, no, you're modeling it on their device and encouraging them to participate that way. And with complex communicators too, we don't want to assume what they mean. So if they, let's say it's chickens crossing the road and they're at a stop sign, and your student touches their device and says, Mom, what we don't want to do is be like, that's really not relevant here. You want to work and try to figure out what they're trying to say, because maybe that child and their mom got stuck at a stop sign at a construction site and they were there for 20 minutes. Maybe that's the image in their head. So, have you seen a stop sign before? Yes or no? Things like that, and work with them to get their communication. But shared reading is very planned. So, if you have students that are using AAC, think what you want to be modeling before you go into it, and how can you best elicit their participation. And also, if they're not fluently using a device, even if they're just touching something on the page or they're making a facial expression, that is participation. Okay, I see you looking at that chicken. Oh, he didn't stop at the stop sign. So you really want to work with them, but it is a planned approach. You do, especially when you just start it. It's not something you just want to wow out and jump into. Definitely think about it before going in.
So Maddie, this is Stacy, and I'm just going to ask this. So it's planned. Would you then make, like, for the shared reading where you're wanting them to label or look at the picture and tell you what they see, then you want to pick what that is and guide them to that? Or do you still kind of, oh, you're looking at the pig, let's find pig on your device? Or is that what I'm hearing? Or is that the next step of, hey, what do you see? You see a pig, let's find it on your device, even though we may have to do 2 or 3 touches to get there? What is the very beginning step?
The very beginning, so the shared reading, you're going to want to do repeated reads. You don't just want to read the book one time and then be done with it. So maybe that first time you read, while they're getting acquainted, maybe touching it, great. And again, it's so dependent on the student because every kid that uses an AAC is going to be so different. But if they can navigate that themselves, go for it. If not, maybe going into, okay, help them figure out the tracking. That's also developing the schema. Make it known, okay, I see you looking at the pig. We're going to go into animals. Okay, no, pig is an animal. Okay, and then can you find the pig on your device? So devices, AACs are set up that the students know these superordinate categories. But sometimes that's if you can't say, oh yeah, maybe that needs to be modeled until they get to that screen to find the answer. But I would definitely think about if there's a new word you're teaching or if there's a new button you're looking for them to be able to access or get more comfortable with, see how you can plan that with your book. But it is kind of tough because there is so much variation in AAC users. But that I could go on for another half an hour about AAC students need to also be doing these schema-based activities because that's how their entire device is set up. Okay, so it's kind of dependent on your student, but check back with their goals. Their SLP may be a good person to work with on this, maybe share this approach and see how you guys could come up with it together. I hope that answered your question. Amy's going to kill me because I could talk for so long about that, but it seems like you have the right idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
I won't kill you. There is another question and I will read it. Do you have any additional resources you like that you can share for kids who also have CCN?
I can go back and add them. Nothing I have right now. None of my students are currently using CCN, but I can look into it and get back to you.
And Kate says, thank you. Other questions for Maddie?
Oh, sorry, my cat is trying to be involved in this presentation.
Maddie, I will say, I think your jokes landed well. There was chuckle on this end of the screen.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. Zoom is really an interesting format because I like to engage with people, and even for I know we're running out of time, even Katie's questions, students who also have CCN, that's things that let's talk about it, let's get into little discussion circles and let's go through this. If we have a student who has this thing, if we have a student who has this thing, and we have a student working with deaf students, working with complex communicators, there's so much variability in how we do things. And you can't find, I sure can't, I can't find any presenter that can be you have to do all of these things. And if you do these things, then it's going to be right for every child. But I just want to give some ideas and just some starting place for a couple things maybe you could implement. But ideally, I would love to learn about each and every one of your students and learn how to make these approaches match what they need to do, make it accessible for them, make it successful for them. But it is so hard with complex communicators. Just students in general, not even students in general, are all so different.
I think you've got a natural lead in to, we've talked about the Institute, which has sponsored today's talk. But if you are interested in connecting with Maddie or having her consult with your team or think through some of those things, there are services available through the clinic at CCCBSD, and that is available to contract for services. So just know that that's available for you too. There is another question. Let's take this last question and then we'll wrap up, okay? For older kids who can read chapter books, do you recommend shared reading a chapter or stepping back into picture books to build the L2 second language of ASL?
So good, really good question. I have two answers for that. If they're already reading chapter books, you can do that together, maybe per page or per chapter, go into that kind of discussion based model. It doesn't always have to be referencing pictures. You can also do it with print. But then picture books also in your mind, oh, picture books are for kids. But no, picture books and wordless books can be for any age. I just gave a book to a high school class in my school, and it's a book about, this is going to speak to me, one, who is as a person, and two, things I'm facilitating. It's a cartoon book about whose poop is that, and it's all these different animals, and it shows a cartoon image of poop, and it explains their diet, and then you have to guess the animal. Super silly, but that's so funny. It's so funny for kids, and it's huge inferencing. So you don't have to step back to the cat sat on the mat. I see a pig. So you don't have to step back into those so it seems like you have an older student who is capable of reading chapter books. Awesome. But what if you, for that L2, went back down to less text and then went into those deep, deep critical thinking skills? Are they inferencing? Can they translate the text? Can they read that text in English and then sign it? So going into that too. So I would say do both of those things, and pick texts that are funny and that they're interesting and the kids are laughing about it. Because even with that poop book, there's a kid who's like, that's gross, right? That is so gross. Like, that's an appropriate comment. So I would say do both of those things.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, how many times do you just get to say poop? Okay, let's wrap it. Thank you all for joining us. We do hope that you'll join us for the last presentation through the Parent-Infant Program happening in June. And be sure to follow the Institute, both on Facebook as well as our website for more information about upcoming events. One more time, I'd like to thank Maddie for sharing her expertise with us, as well as to thank Desiree and Jenna, our interpreters, for helping to facilitate communication tonight. Have a good evening all. Take care.